Hi, this is Alex, and if you love music, well, you've come to the right place because we're all about albums. Wow, another year flew by, and 2022 did not disappoint. In fact, many great new albums were released throughout the year, as well as many reissued, both classic and not so classic albums. Additionally, there was the Music Fidelity fiasco, where Music Fidelity came clean, where they had cut several albums from digital masters rather than analog masters, as they had originally said. The question of your loyalty to Mobile Fidelity and what you feel about their future, that's a personal decision. All I know is the music, for the most part, sounds great, even when they were cut from digital masters. So for me, that's not going to dissuade me, but you have to make your own decision. The list of my best from 2022 is, of course, my list with a capital M. Of course, I could not include every album that I thought was great or very good during the year. Many, many more albums would have made the list if I didn't stop somewhere. This is hard. You have to choose, just like if you go to your favorite restaurant and you have to look at the menu and decide which meal you're going to eat tonight. So I had to do the same thing here. I hope some of my album picks will not only excite you, but some may even mesmerize you. And who knows, one of the albums that I'm going to talk about may become one of your personal favorites. I'm sorry if I may not have included your favorite album from the past year, but time is a factor when recording videos. As on my prior best of lists, the new album or the reissue must have been released during the 2022 calendar year. The albums will appear in no particular order. However, at the end of the video, I will tell you what was my favorite album of the year, what I think is the best album of 2022, and finally, what I thought was the best reissue to come out this past year. Oh, and one final note, the unknown album from the last video that I did, I will not cover that on this video. I will wait and discuss that on my next video after the new year. So, without further delay, here is my list of the best albums or reissues to come out in 2022. First album up is Crooked Tree, and that is by Molly Tuttle and the Golden Highway. Now, this album came out in April of this year, and it's on the None Such label. The album features many contributions from well-known bluegrass and Americana artists, including Margot Price, Gillian Welch, Old Crow Medicine Show, amongst others. Molly is a very talented artist. She has a very traditional bluegrass sounding voice, and it is quite pleasing even when she's singing about some serious or sad topics. So if you are a bluegrass fan and looking for a great bluegrass album, this is my pick for the best bluegrass album that came out in 2022. One other fact about this great album is Molly Tuttle is a great guitar player, and she has won in the past Best Guitarist for the Year. Next up is the Watson Family Hour, and the album is entitled The Watson Family Hour Volume 2. Now, this album is a collective, meaning several artists came together to perform, and the common factor of this diverse repertoire is the Watson siblings. For those of you who don't know, Sarah and Sean Watkins made up 2/3 of Nickel Creek, which is a great band that won many previous awards and had many outstanding albums. When I was talking about the collective, that is many artists that came together to perform at the Watson Family Hour, and this included people like Fiona Apple and Jackson Browne, Madison Cunningham, amongst many others, and they supported each other in their endeavors. I think you'd enjoy this album not only for the songs, but the sound quality is excellent as well. Next up is the new album by Michaela Anne, and it is entitled Oh to Be That Free, and this comes out on the Yep Rock label. Now, Michaela Anne is a singer-songwriter, and she has a very pleasing singing voice. The songs on this album deal with both serious topics with a lot of hurting going on, but also there is healing involved as well with her songs. This is reflective of what was going on in Michaela Anne's life at the time. She was dealing with a drinking issue. She also became pregnant, and during that time, her mother suffered a major stroke, and Michaela had to go and help care for her mother. This kind of changed her perspective in life, and the songs that are performed here, which are quite heartwarming, reflect what she was going through. She really excels in this album with her vocals, with a lot of deep, deep felt emotions. The next up album is by Lissy, and this is entitled Carving Canyons, and this is on the Lion Boy record label. I've spoken about this album on my previous video. I think this album was going to have a quite wide appeal. Now, Lissy is a singer-songwriter. She has both a pop as well as a country folk sound to her album. This album does contain somewhat of a pop sound, and that's why I think this album will have more of a universal appeal. This is a very reflective album for Lissy in that she just went through a pretty rough breakup, and the album, I guess, not only expresses what she was going through, but I think is a way for her own self-healing. This album is actually more upbeat in the sound, at least, than you'd expect from what I just said about the album. I think you'd really, really like this album, and it was really one of my top albums for 2022, so check it out. Next up, we have the album Tucson with the subtitle A Country Rock Opera, and it is by the group Giant Sand. The band on all their other albums is known as Giant Sand, but I will explain a little later why they're called Giant Sand on this release. Now, this album originally came out in 2012, so why am I talking about it here? Well, in the record store day back in April, this album was re-released for its 10th anniversary, and it became available on vinyl. I have it here on the CD, obviously, and I was able to get a CD, used copy in great condition. It sounds great. I was unable to fight with other people, and I was unable to get a vinyl copy. But nonetheless, this is still a wonderful sounding album. Now, this group is a group that changes quite a bit over time. However, the common denominator is the main writer and singer for the band, and that is Howie Gelb. This is a quite lengthy album. It is 70 minutes long, and the album has an alternative country sound to it, but the album does stray quite a bit, and it's very, very unpredictable where the album is going to go. However, there is a underlying Americana sound, I would say, to this album throughout. I think the title, A Country Rock opera is a little bit not true in that I don't think this tells a story from start to finish. Each song, however, most of them anyway, are quite good and do tell individual stories, but I think it's not as tightly knit as one might feel by the title of the album. Nonetheless, I think this is my favorite Giant Sand album. It's one worth checking out. Oh, and I was going to tell you why it was called Giant Sand. That is, this is the first time that Howie expanded the band, and instead of a typical 5-member band, he made this a 10-member band, and because of that, he wanted to express that in the title of the group. In other words, Giant Sand. The next album up is the album Big Time by Angel Olsen. Now, Angel Olsen is an indie artist and has several previous albums which sound quite different than this one. Her vocals, although similar, this album has a different sound. This definitely has a country flair type sound to it. It has both heartache and love songs in it, and I would classify this as an Americana album. In fact, in the UK, this is the #1 selling Americana album in 2022. I think that a lot of this album's emotion of heartache and love comes from the fact that the artist lost both of her parents while recording this album. The songs are quite memorable, and this is probably the album I played the most in 2022. I had it on repeat play quite a bit. I like to listen to it not only at home but in my car. I think this is one of the albums I can definitely give a 5-star rating to. I think very, very few people won't like this album, not only because of her singing, but the songs are very, very strong. And as I said, each song is very memorable, and I like that about an album, that I think about the songs even after the album is over. So check this one out. The next album up is by Bryde. That's spelled B-R-Y-D-E. This is a great album, and this was only available originally on CD. Now I believe you can track it down, possibly on LP as well. This is a British artist, and this is her 3rd album release. Bryde is the artist Sarah Howell. Now, she made up half of a duo of the band known as Paper Airplanes. This album is very hard to classify. Is it a pop album? Is it an alternative indie album? Is it an Americana album? I don't know. I think Bryde sounds like Bride, and it is a wonderful, wonderful record. I give this 6 out of 5 stars. If I could, I would. She has a really excellent singing voice, and many of the songs have excellent hooks to them. I think that this album would appeal more possibly to pop fans than folk fans, but I'm more of a folk fan, and I really enjoy this album, so I think it is a crossover genre type album. The album Still by Bryde is an album I could easily recommend and give my highest recommendation. I think that many music fans out there, except maybe for those who are into heavy metal, are going to really like this album. Next up, we have the album Loose Future, and that is by one of my favorite Americana artists, the great Courtney Marie Andrews, and this is on Yep Rock Records. This is her 8th studio album, and many of the songs are mid-tempo, but what you really focus on this album is her vocals. She is probably one of the quintessential Americana voices, and I would put her up there with Gillian Welch. And Courtney does not disappoint in any way. I think All 8 of her releases are excellent. This is one of those artists that when their album comes out, I just buy it. I don't even listen to any of the songs to stream them at all. I am so confident in the quality and artistic talent that Courtney has that I just go out and purchase her album. Now, I don't say you should do that, but if you don't know Courtney Marie Andrews, you should check her out. She is an outstanding singer and a very gifted songwriter. So again, very high recommendation to Loose Future by the great Courtney Marie Andrews. Next album up is The Age of Apathy, and it is by the Irish singer, and I have the pronunciation right. I checked it out several times. It is pronounced Aoife O'Donovan, again an Irish singer, singer-songwriter, and this is a truly great album. Most of the songs are folk-inspired, and she sings many beautiful ballads on this album, The Age of Apathy. Also, she does have some help on several of the songs, including Madison Cunningham, who put out also a great album this past year named Revealer, and that's the album you see over my right shoulder. This is a very pleasing sounding album, and although it is maybe not as memorable songs as some of my other albums, I really like to listen to this album at night when I want to just unwind. So check out Aoife O'Donovan, her album entitled Age of Apathy. Next up is Miko Marks and the Resurrectors, and this is the album entitled Feel Like Going Home, and it is on Red Tone label. Now, as you can see, I just put the image up on the screen. I do not own this album, and the reason is this album is only available on an MP3, and I don't like sound of MP3, so I'd rather just stream the album at this point. Hopefully one day this album will have physical copies made, and at that point I will definitely purchase one. It is definitely worth owning. This is a gospel sounding album with rock undertones, and Miss Marks has a very powerful singing voice, and she is able to be heard and carry the songs above the rockin' band The Resurrectors. If you're looking for a very vibrant and live sounding album, this is one of the ones to get. All the players were together at the same time and recorded in the studio, not individually, track by track, but they all played the song together, giving it this wonderful, live, exciting sound. I definitely wish this album had physical media, but anyway, check her out on your favorite streaming service. Miko Marks and the Resurrectors, Feel Like Going Home. Next up is the artist Tammy Nielsen, and it is her album entitled Kingmaker, and she is a Canadian-born country singer, and she has been living most of her life and is currently in New Zealand, and possibly that's why I haven't heard of her. But this is a great, great singer with one of the most powerful singing voices I've ever heard, but in a good way, not in a way that overwhelms you, but complements the songs. One of the songs on the album is entitled Beyond the Stars, and it is a beautiful track, and she sings a duet with none other than Willie Nelson. And I gotta tell you, the price of admission for this album is worth it just to hear this song. This is a 5-star rated album, in my opinion. If you are a country, folk, or Americana lover, this is an album you can't miss. So check her out, Tammy Nielsen. She has several other albums, but I think you should start with this one. You're really gonna love it. She's gonna knock your socks off. Next up is the band Florist, and it is their album entitled Florist. No, it is not their first album. It's actually their 4th album. The lead singer is named Emily Sprang. She has a great singing voice that is somewhat hushed in nature, but quite beautiful and goes along very well with the songs. These songs have an almost environmental sound, a very, not really spacey, but more, how should I say, outdoorsy sound, and quite relaxing and beautiful. The band recorded this album actually on a porch where they had rented a house in upstate New York, and they all gathered around and they actually recorded 19 tracks for this album. Pretty remarkable. Now, many of the tracks are shorter tracks. Of the 19, 10 are vocals and 9 are just instrumentals, which really set this beautiful mood for the album. This album incorporates nature and has a lot of sound explorations with the instrumentals, and it has a very warm and cozy feeling. A really wonderful album, a new band to me. I wish I would have known about them sooner. They are from Brooklyn, believe it or not, and I think you would really enjoy listening to them. Now, 2022 was a great year for reissues, and I'm going to talk about just a handful of the reissues that I think are noteworthy. Now, I am not going to include Revolver. Yes, I know that might have been the big reissue for 2022, but look, the Beatles are the Beatles, and what's the point? What could I say about Revolver that hasn't been said umpteen times? Great record. If you don't have a copy, you should get a copy. The new mix is great. I recommend it, but I'm not going to talk about that as one of my top reissues for 2022. First up is Pharoah Sanders, and it is his album entitled Karma. This album came out in 1970, and it is on the Impulse label. By the hype sticker, you can see this is part of the Acoustic Sounds series album. Since you know that this is an Acoustic Sound series album, this album is pressed at QRP, which is possibly one of the top 2 or 3 pressing plants in the world. Also, you know that the quality of the vinyl is going to be top notch, and you know that it's going to be cut by only the best people. So if you're looking for a great sounding album, always anything on the Acoustic Sound series, it's going to be great. So who is Pharoah Sanders? Well, Pharoah Sanders is a tenor saxophone player. He started most notably in the 60s, where he joined the John Coltrane band when he was into the avant-garde stage of his career. And Pharoah Sanders is very influential in the free jazz and spiritual jazz movement. The opening song on this album is entitled "The Creator Has a Master Plan." And this song, believe it or not, goes for almost 32 minutes long. I kid you not. And this has a very free sounding jazz improvisation throughout. And yet there is an underlying structure that is quite fascinating. But at the same time, the song is extremely unpredictable. And it is unpredictable in a good way. And what I mean by that is that I was waiting to hear what was going to come next, because I didn't know what was going to be played next. But it was interesting, exciting, it was relaxing, it stimulated you. It is the type of song that I've never experienced before, and I like that a lot. So if you want to experience something new, take a listen to this album, Karma by Pharoah Sanders. It's a sensational album. Next up is another 1970s release, also a jazz album, this one by Alice Coltrane, and it is entitled Ta the El Dowd. Now, Alice Coltrane, yes, she was married to John Coltrane, and she actually was featured on John's albums. She played with him towards the end of his career before he passed away, and she played keyboards, and she replaced McCoy Tyner in the band. Alice is also, just like Pharoah Sanders, very important in the spiritual jazz movement. In fact, she's one of the artists that introduced the harp and made that an okay instrument to be featured on jazz albums. And as I said with Pharoah Sanders, who is also into free jazz and spiritual jazz, both of them collaborated quite often on these albums. And in fact, Pharoah Sanders is featured quite prominently on her album, Ta the El Daoud. There doesn't seem to be a year that a reissue of a John Coltrane album doesn't come out, or in fact several, and this is no exception. And I'm not really going to talk much about this, but I just want to mention that John Coltrane had this wonderful album, Blue Train, the complete masters, come out also in 2022. The reason I wanted to talk about this album, it is a wonderful John Coltrane album. In fact, it's one of my 3 favorite Coltrane albums. I highly recommend it. And this is a stereo version. There is a mono version out there, but the stereo version gives you extra alternate takes of the album that haven't been previously released. For you audiophiles out there, this is a very high quality album. It is an audiophile 180 gram reissue. It was done by Kevin Gray, cut at RTI, and it was originally recorded by Rudy Van Gelder. And for those of you jazz buffs out there, you know just about any album recorded by Rudy Van Gelder is a great sounding album. Next up, I'm going to talk about the last reissue that I put on my Best of 2022. And this is done by Analog Productions on the UHQR, and it is one of the Steely Dan albums, the album that was released just this month in December, and it is the 1973 album entitled Countdown to Ecstasy. It originally came out on the ABC label, now it is on the Geffen label. As all of you know, UHQR series are sort of like the one-step series that are done by Mobile Fidelity. This is done on their Clarity vinyl, which is one of the dead quiet vinyls you'll ever hear. Additionally, all of their albums are from analog source tapes if they are available. And usually these are limited runs, and the quality that goes into this album is second to none. I have never heard anyone complain about an album pressed at QRP by Analog Productions. And just to have a little icing on the cake, this album is cut by the great mastering engineer, none other than Bernie Grundman. Now, I would say that I think this is Steely Dan's best album. I know it's my favorite album by the band. I think all the songs are extremely strong on this album. If you're new to Steely Dan, I still would recommend this album because I still think you'll be enthralled by the album. But nonetheless, even though they don't have really much of any hits on this album, I highly recommend Countdown to Ecstasy to anyone out there who wants to purchase one of the Steely Dan albums. And finally, for those of you keeping count, number 17, here it is. No, the album is entitled, Here It Is, a tribute to Leonard Cohen. Now, I usually do not do compilation albums, but this one is special. Leonard Cohen is one of the great American songwriters, not only American songwriters, great songwriters, period. He passed away in 2016. He has recorded some of the greatest and best known songs out there, and this is highly recommended. The album is on the Blue Note label, and as I have said in the past, pretty much any album on Blue Note you know is going to be good quality sound. This album was put together by Leonard Cohen's friend and producer, Larry Klein. What Larry Klein wanted to do was to honor his friend, and what he did was he got 12 musicians, and they all came together, and what they did was they picked one song that Leonard Cohen did, and each artist went ahead and did their interpretation of the song. But for me, what's most interesting about this record is, although all these singers have distinctive, well-known voices, each of them decided to take a back seat to the lyrics. The lyrics here is what speaks, and this is what's honoring Leonard Cohen. You know who is singing the song because each voice is distinctive, but all the singing is subdued, and they let the words do the talking. I've listened to this album a few times. I really enjoy this album. Even if you're not a Leonard Cohen fan, you might get turned on to him by listening to this album, and this album has a lot of great artists. Now, I can't remember all the artists on this album, so I'm just going to flip the album over and read them to you. Norah Jones, Peter Gabriel, Gregory Porter, Sarah McLachlan, who tackles his song Hallelujah, and it's quite an emotional song. Emmanuel Wilkins, Luciana Sousa, James Taylor, believe it or not, Iggy Pop, who does a wonderful job, Mavis Staples, David Gray, a very well-known British singer-songwriter, Nathaniel Rateliff, and the great jazz guitarist Bill Frisell. That's my list of the best of 2022, not only new albums, but reissues, and as you saw on the last album, a tribute album, which is a compilation of songs by Leonard Cohen. Let me know what you think about my picks for 2022. And if you have albums that I should have mentioned, let me know. I also like to find new music if I'm not familiar with it. And it's okay to disagree with me. That's what makes horse racing. As always, this is Alex with All About Albums. Thanks for listening. Have a great day and a great upcoming new year. And remember, keep them spinning.